Dr. Stephen M. Greer. Dr. Greer, welcome back.
Thank you. Glad to be with you tonight.
Well, let's go ahead and start with the campaign that ends illegal UFO and free energy secrecy, because that's obviously what it all comes down to. And after I saw the movie Sirius at the premiere, a friend turned to me and said, I don't think it's about the shock value. I said, no, it can't be. It's about the technology, the free energy, anything that they would be getting from these ETs visiting us, that as opposed to using fossil fuels.
Right. Well, I think that there's a number of issues. One is the psychological warfare value. The new film we're working on, which is already broken all crowdfunding metrics for a publicly crowdfunded movie, is called Unacknowledged, and the title Unacknowledged comes from the unacknowledged special access projects, which are the deep black illegal projects that run in corporate America and around the world, and also in the U.S. government, where the people who are supposed to supervise our spending have no idea what's going on. These are completely illegal projects and outrageous. And so we call this movie Unacknowledged, and they're going to have a book that comes out at the same time with it called Unacknowledged, the same title. It's going to have an unbelievable amount of evidence and documents and top secret military whistleblower testimony from all over the world. And this is being supported by the public, and I'm very excited. We're at our 6-week mark since we launched the project, and we had a minimum goal of $500,000, and we've raised $450,000 in the first 6 weeks, which is a crowdfunding record. And we've also signed up a major international distributor for the film. So our goal is to put so much hard-hitting material in this movie and in the book, and to get it out all over the world, that no one can deny the reality that the UFOs are real, and that there are covert programs that have these technologies that are illegally keeping them away from the public. And I think this is the time where we have to all come together and say, look, we're not asking the government to do anything. We're going to do it ourselves, which means we're going to produce this disclosure, where this is the next big wave in the disclosure movement, which I founded in the year 2000, but which was really an outgrowth of Project Starlight when we were briefing the Clinton administration and his CIA director in the 1990s. So this has been 25 years in the making, and we're at the point now where the numbers of people are just amazing who are coming forward, both in terms of new evidence and material, but we're making a call, and I'm going to say this on your show right now. Anyone in a covert program dealing with UFOs or the technology or zero-point energy, free energy technology, who is willing to come forward in this movie should contact us as soon as possible. We have new witnesses from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, from the CIA and others coming forward, and we want to have more. And the more, the better. So we have set up everything so that people can provide their documents and their testimony without any risk at all to themselves for punishment for speaking. Because in 1997 and 98, we proved that all of these projects were being run illegally, and we sent a letter to every agency in the U.S. government stating that unless otherwise directed, this is an illegal project, and unless you tell us otherwise, we're going to start releasing all this information and data, and that's what we did. I founded the Global Disclosure Movement, and since then there are 15 countries that have opened up their UFO files. There are many people who've come forward, but we need to take this to the next level where we have deeper and more substantial whistleblowers that come forward, and also people who come forward with the technology. So the other thing we're asking for from the public is to network with people who may have one of these free energy devices, whether or not they're associated with a government contractor or the government. They may just be an inventor, because we have now identified the people who can fund the research and get this out to the public in a massive way, and I mean people that I had no idea we would ever be able to get, who are very supportive of our objectives of ending the lock that big oil and nuclear power has on the planet that's destroying the biosphere. So the people are all in place. We need to find someone with the technology, and we will feature it in the film, and we will feature it in the book, and we will massively disclose it at a global disclosure concert event with the film coming out and the book coming out with, and our objective is to have at least 1 billion people to 2 billion people watching, with a lot of A-list celebrities on the stage with a free energy device. And to do this, we're going to have to find someone who has something that's not a fake. You know, there are a lot of fakes out there, and we've spent almost $1 million trying to run down things that have been complete frauds and fakes. But we know that there are people out there listening right now who either have such a device or know of someone who does, and they need to get hold of us, 6 weeks ago. But, I mean, as of immediately, because we have a team of people who can interface with them and bring that technology and secure it. Now, I have to say, our objective with the technology is to massively disclose it to the public. And the person, you know, if the inventor wants to be anonymous, they can be. If the person who invented it needs to have to be compensated for their work, we have people who can fund them and compensate them. But we need to get it out, and we need to get it out in a way that is as open sourced and massively disclosed as possible. Because if you keep something like this secret, you know, Dr. J, every single person and team we've worked with who've tried to do this secretively, they're all dead, or they've all disappeared, or they've all had their technology stolen under national security orders. So what we're saying to people is don't repeat history. Let's make new history. The old way is to do this with intellectual property and secrecy, and it always fails. So that's a big part of what we want to do with this campaign, is not only bring out the truth about the fact that we're not alone and that the UFOs are real, and that these projects are being run completely illegally without the proper oversight of the people we elect and send to Washington. But also that the technologies that are at the heart of the secrecy would give us a completely new civilization within our lifespan. And if people have even a proof of principle prototype that is self-running. Now let me explain what that means. We're not interested in something that's plugged into a wall outlet. Just forget about that, because there's too many ways to trick a meter and do stuff. We're interested in something that is a self-running machine. If it has a startup battery or capacitor, that startup power system needs to be charged from the output of it, and the output at the same time is running lights and fans and doing some real, work in the real world. That's, some people would call this a perpetual motion machine or energy machine. It's not. If someone knows what they're doing, they should be able to just do this by understanding that the 0 point and quantum vacuum energy field can be accessed through electronic systems. And we want to find someone who has something operational. To date, we have not identified one that meets our criteria of the loop being closed and running itself. But as soon as we find that, we will do a massive disclosure around that. It will be featured in this movie, which will be seen all over the world, and we will have it at a disclosure concert that will have just a huge percentage of the world's population watching. Because we feel that the only way to do this is to pull all of this out of the shadows and secrecy and put it out in the light of day. And if you do it that way, and with social media and the internet, you can do it so that no matter what, they can't shut it down. Even if the big lamestream media says, we've been contacted by the CIA, we're not going to cover this story, who cares? If you have Leonardo DiCaprio on the stage with this thing, because he's a big environmentalist, you're going to get 1 billion people to see it. Who cares about CNN? So we have to do this. I think I tell people right now, the people have to rise up in a peaceful revolution and end the secrecy. And that's why we're calling this the campaign that ends UFO and free energy secrecy, not the campaign that's asking the government to do it for us, because the government is so screwed up and so dysfunctional. I've had a place in Washington for 18 years. I'm there all the time meeting with people in the government. It is so dysfunctional you can't even believe it. As much as you think it's broken, it's worse than that. And the truth of the matter is that the people who are politicians, I doubt they have the courage to do this. And even if they start doing it, they're usually threatened and they back off. So I think this is where we, the people, my home right here is near Thomas Jefferson's house. And I tell you that we, the people, are going to have to step forward and make this change ourselves, not counting on the government to do it for us. And I know for a fact we can do it, but we need to come together. And I think people should go to our website, which is SiriusDisclosure.com. It's SIRIUS, like the star, SiriusDisclosure, all one word.com. And, even if you make a contribution of $1 or $2, or just network this to your friends, and there's a toolbar at the top where you can contact us if you're a military witness or a government contractor witness, or if you know of someone who has one of these free energy devices. And we have a whole team of people who we've just put here in place in Virginia who are working on this full time, 17 hours a day. And we're hoping that we'll be able to bring this, all of this out late this year or early next year is our target, and bring this forward. And I think we're racing the clock here, because if you look at all the comments by Hillary Clinton and John Podesta and people who are beginning to cover, even the New York Times and CNN are covering the fact that John Podesta, the chief of staff for President Clinton and the man who put together the Obama cabinet and who we provided the briefing for Obama through, John Podesta and Hillary Clinton have both been making open comments about getting to the bottom of the UFO issue. And the question is, will they really do it this time? I think we need to do it for them, or make it an inevitability that it has to happen.
There's a few things you said that I think are super important before we move on to the next topic. I made this horrible mistake a few years ago, if you recall, when we were live on air, when I mentioned USAPs, but instead of saying unacknowledged, I said unauthorized secret access programs. And there's a lot of people out there who may think unauthorized and unacknowledged are the same thing, but they are two drastically different things. Before I go on to some of these other points that you hit on, do you mind reminding people
Sure.
why it's so important to know the difference?
Yeah, when you talk about an unacknowledged project, you're really talking a USAP, literally the way it works. I'll give you a really crystal clear example. I have one of my military advisors was in a nearly $3 billion unacknowledged special access project. Now, that was just one compartmented project. And the way it worked was, they got together when they were running this. They were taken into an underground skiff, a secure communication intelligence facility. Everyone had all of their cell phones, watches, anything taken away from them. They went down there. There was a security officer, and the security officer had a gun and a clip, and he pulled a bullet out of the clip. He held it up and he said, "Sir," he turned to everyone. He says, "Men, you are in a unacknowledged special access project, and if you speak of this project to anyone, including your commanding officer, your 4-star general, anyone who's not actually in this room right now, there's a bullet. It has your name on it. It will find you, and you're a dead man."
And that's
now,
what they use.
That's how
right?
they work. So it doesn't really matter. So if someone is the President of the United States or a Senate Intelligence Committee member, or even I brief the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is almost as big as the CIA that's inside the Pentagon for the Department of Defense intelligence gathering. I brief the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, on and on. All of these people have been denied access to these unacknowledged special access projects, which are completely unconstitutional, outrageous, and illegal. And so there's $100 to $200 billion a year being stolen from the U.S. government that go into these programs. And, look, and no less a figure than Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense for George W. Bush. We have it on tape, and it's in the movie Sirius. which, by the way, you can see for free right now on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/S disclosure, S as in serious, but it's just S disclosure. And we've already in the past month had 400,000 people look at that. Now, in that movie, we have a clip where Donald Rumsfeld, who was no, crusader for transparency, he was an arch-conservative neocon who got us into Iraq and to Afghanistan. And he is saying on the day before 9/11 that there's a $2.3 trillion unaccounted for in the Department of Defense budgets over the last few years. Now I understand it's $8.5 trillion, and this is our money, taxpayer money, and it's going into these projects. And so, what we did an assessment in 1997 and 98 after I had a lot of high-level meetings, including with the CIA director for President Clinton, and we concluded these projects are criminal enterprises, like a mafia. And we wrote a letter to that effect and basically said, we are hereby releasing everyone from their national security oaths who have been involved in anything related to UFOs, extraterrestrial intelligence, or the technologies and the reverse engineering efforts. Any documents they have, fair game. Any testimony they want to provide is open source, fair game. Any materials they have, fair game. And do you know that we have up on our website at SeriousDisclosure.com a link to almost 5 or 6 dozen top secret people's testimony. Not a single one of those people have been harassed or even contacted or threatened, not legally or personally, because we have a system set up that they have all been untouchable. So what we're saying is now we need another whole wave, a huge wave of more of these folks, not just from the U.S., but from other countries as well, because the group that deals with the secrecy on this is a transnational group. It's not just in the U.S. It's in Canada, the U.K., Australia, China, Russia. It's all over the world. And we need to have people understand that they can come forward and we will be able to do this without them having any penalties under the law. Now, a lot of people say, well, couldn't they still be at risk? I said, not if they do it right. If they do it publicly and massively, people are going to be left alone. Why? Because the secret groups that are involved with this don't want to be caught in a public assassination again. They don't want to be caught in a public disaster. So, because they know that will expose them. They only have the power they have by lurking in the shadows of secrecy. And so if we do this in a massively disclosure way, in a mass disclosure fashion, with millions, and preferably 1 billion or 2 people who see it, we can bring out not only the information that ends the secrecy and the knowledge, but also the science and technology. So that the technology is proven that we can pull energy from the 0 point and quantum vacuum field, that we can run our houses and cars without fossil fuels or nuclear power, and we can start a civilization that at last becomes what Michikaku would call a level 1 civilization, where we're no longer destroying the biosphere and we can live peacefully in a just and a socially just and abundant world without damaging the biosphere. And only then are we going to be welcome to go out into space to have become part of this interstellar family of civilizations. They're waiting on us, on Earth, to get our act together, and have been incredibly patient for the last 70 years since we shot down those craft at Roswell, and that was a shoot down. That was an electromagnetic weapon at Roswell that knocked those 2 or 3 craft down. So, and we have an FBI document that explains this, actually, which will be in this new movie. So I think people have to understand that the unacknowledged special access projects have been running amok since the 50s, completely illegally, ever since Eisenhower lost control of them. And we're on solid legal ground and moral ground to bring this information out. And we need mass defections from these covert programs and people who are willing to go on the record, name, rank, and serial number, with their DD-214s, their discharge papers from the military if they were in the military, or their employment record if they were employed, who will give testimony about what they have seen or heard or worked on. And that's what we're asking for tonight. And we need people who have these technologies to step forward, who have them, if they're willing to have them appropriately verified and vetted and massively disclosed. Now, we know some people who have some of these technologies and they say, well, we want to keep it secret. I said, well, you'll keep it secret like Stan Meyer kept his things secret until he was in the grave. Stan Meyer had a toroidal donut-shaped free energy device that had a national security order on it, and he took that to the grave with him.
Really?
And then yes.
Wow.
Our team went in there and saw it, John. We saw it. And what happened is that my project was trying to get that entire archive and all those materials of just a few years ago, and a group from Michigan jumped in, had more money than we had. They bought it, kept it all secret, and then I heard in the past year that entire team has been eliminated.
I wouldn't be surprised. We have a history in the United States of using people and getting rid of them. I mean, there's so many instances that can be shown.
Well, the reason for it is that they all make the same mistake. They're all doing this as if they're handling a new smartphone from Apple, and keeping it secret. When you're dealing with an explosive new technology that would completely make obsolete all the oil and gas in the world, you have to develop a strategy that meets that challenge. And that's what we're doing. That's what we've done. But the problem is you get a lot of people who've been successful in business and technology, and they don't understand the deep national security state. They don't understand the cabal. They don't know what buzzsaw they're about to be walking into and the landmines that are out in front of them that they're going to step on and blow up. We do, because this is what we've been doing for 25 years. So what we want to do is be the launch vehicle for one of these technologies if someone would cooperate with us in allowing it to get launched to the world. And, a year ago or even 6 months ago, I couldn't have said, look, we really don't have a lot of resources where we could compensate you. Now we have people on our team where if we can put one of these devices in front of some of these folks, and someone if the patent needs to be bought out or if they need to be compensated, we can do it. We can absolutely do it. And so this is a game. This is a huge game changer in the new energy effort, because now we have the means to actually take anything that someone has, and if they've been waiting for a time to do it, don't wait any longer. It's now, because the Earth is in trouble, the biosphere. And the other thing that we're in great trouble with is, I have a big concern. The fact that the mainstream media started covering the comments of Hillary Clinton and John Podesta on this makes me think someone's pulled the trigger to do a false flag disclosure where sort of like what Werner von Braun, who invented the rocket for Adolf Hitler, said. He says they're going to hoax a threat from outer space, and it will fool everyone on Earth, and it's all a lie. It's all a big lie. And what I think is that I'm a little concerned that we need to hurry. This is, the June of 2016, and Werner von Braun was making those warnings on his deathbed 40 years ago in the 1970s. And I think that we're at the point where something that's 1,000 times worse than 9/11 is going to be unleashed on the world if we, the people, don't get ahead of it and expose the lie for what it is. So that's the other thing we're asking for. People who know about what I call the cosmic false flag operation need to step forward, and need to step forward now. Some years ago, I don't know if you remember this story, Dr. J, there was a man that came to the 1997 briefings for Congress that we organized in Washington, who was on an interagency committee, intelligence committee, that had all the plans in place to launch a false flag operation that would be like a cosmic 9/11 that would fool everyone. And he, the night before we did the briefings for members of Congress, he was approached by people he had worked for back in the 70s when he was on this interagency committee, and they begged him not to tell this story, and they took him out to a secure location out in Virginia outside of Washington until after the event was over. But he had told me about what he was going to testify to, and he was going to testify to the fact that, and we need more people like him now to come forward, that there was a plan that was fully operational in 1974, and he knew it had been in place well before the time he was involved, where they could hoax by using man-made anti-gravity devices, things that look like UFOs, and by using holograms and other special effects, and hoax an alien attack on something on Earth that would convince people that we had to quick unite the world, as Ronald Reagan said, around an alien threat. And he said it was all a hoax and it's all stagecraft. But he said everything was in place over 40 years ago. And I then found people who said, oh, yes, that plan was concocted by people at the CIA in the 1950s. And that's what they meant in these documents that we're going to release through this film and book that talk about the psychological warfare value of the subject and why they engaged Disney Studios. This is in a 1953 document, by the way, to do movies about this and Little Green Men. They wanted it either ridiculed or they wanted it spun in the direction of a threat from outer space. So all this stuff that's going on with the mainstream media beginning to cover this, and covering some people in the UFO ghetto, the sort of subculture of the UFO world, makes me concerned because the spin that I think they're getting ready to put on it, or they have been putting on it, if you look at the interview that was done by with the Blink-182 guy that I first brought into the subject, with Tom DeLonge, and it was all, that the aliens are here to eat us for lunch and we need to go to war with them. And he's being fed disinformation from guys at the Pentagon, and he doesn't know that he's being played as a mouthpiece for the false information to the world. So they have people that they're using who are witting and unwitting mouthpieces for this agenda. And the agenda was set back in the 50s when Douglas MacArthur said World War III will be interplanetary. So these guys have been planning this kind of nonsense since about the time I was born, and I'm no spring chicken. And I'll tell you right now that the only thing that's a bigger threat to the world than keeping all the free energy technology secret and destroying the biosphere is the public being stampeded into a false flag, cosmic false flag like I'm talking about. Unfortunately, there's the thinnest line of sanity between that now and that happening, and we've got to get people. We need to have more whistleblowers who have known about this before it happens to expose it, because if it's exposed in advance, they can't do it. You see what I'm saying? Because the public will know it's a hoax. And it's so much, it's like this man who was the senior scientist at the Naval Research Labs, the largest Department of Defense lab in the world, who for years was on my team. He has since passed away of cancer. God bless him. He was the third, literally the third highest ranking person at the biggest Department of Defense lab in the world, the Naval Research Labs in Washington. And he said in my home here, with witnesses that I have, and stated that before 9/11, he was in Vice President Dick Cheney's office and saw the information and plans for 9/11 before it happened. Now, I've not talked about this publicly because I have, frankly, bigger fish to fry than the tragedy of 9/11, because we're talking about something that'd be a global tragedy. But, he says this kind of stuff is done all the time. And people forget that the entire Vietnam War was expanded greatly by President Johnson and the Congress because we exaggerated or hoaxed an attack on our ships in the Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam. A lot of people don't know this history. This is a matter of historical fact.
That's right.
And so there we have 58,000 of our young boys killed. We're just after Memorial Day here. I was just in Washington for Memorial Day. and trillions of dollars spent on these wars. And of course, Iraq, they said, oh, all the weapons of mass destruction that Saddam Hussein had. He didn't have anything. And the people knew he didn't have anything. We got stampeded into a war that's cost hundreds of thousands of lives in the Middle East. And now we have ISIS and thousands of our own soldiers and tens of thousands who've been blown to smithereens with missing arms and legs and eyes. For what? You know, and I tell people, I said, this is what's being fast-tracked. You need to wake up and smell the coffee. That all the scary stuff that's in all over the internet and all these radio shows and all these programs that go on and on and on about the threat and the alien threat, this is all concocted stuff that they're manipulating the public through propaganda to get them to accept the sacrifice in blood and treasure of the next big war, which they want to be interplanetary. And I'm telling people we have to expose this beforehand. And that's why I'm making a call for, now there are people out there who weren't in the military. We want people in the military and government intelligence and corporate world who know about this to come forward. But we also want people who've been victims of it. You know what I'm talking about, Dr. J. There are people out there who have had their cattle mutilated or who have themselves been abducted and had implants put in them, and they remember that it was that there were these weird-looking creatures that, by the way, are man-made that we call aliens, and there are military people running the show. We need those people to come forward because there are people who, when they try to drug people and do these sort of mind control stuff with them when they're abducting them, they break through and they remember the military guy standing in the background telling the little man-made looking alien creatures to do it. And what people don't understand is that this has been going on since the 50s and 60s where they've been hoaxing stuff like this. So there are people who've had real contact with ETs, and there are people who have had things that look like contact that's scary as all get out that they've been doing to create a false narrative, a false story. And in some cases, like the Benowitz affair, you know, the story in New Mexico where this woman saw one of our man-made anti-gravity devices near Sandia National Labs in Kirkland Air Force Base at the wee hours of the morning. What that was, they sent a squad to abduct her and make it look like an alien abduction. It was all humans. And then that made its way to Paul Benowitz, who ended up in a psychiatric hospital because it kind of blew his mind, all the tricks they were playing on him. But it was all to cover up the story that this woman had seen at very close range, one of our super secret spacecraft that were anti-gravity, which, by the way, we've had since the 50s. So I think people have to understand there's a very big game being played here. And there's a lot of deception, and there's a lot of false information out there that's designed to get people to go along, as Ronald Reagan did, with the whole Star Wars effort. And this is a very dangerous thing. So almost equal to and maybe worse than the fact that we're destroying the biosphere is that we have a false flag operation that they've already done all the propaganda for starting 60 years ago. People ask me, when would this happen? I said, it's been happening. It's already happening. You go to any UFO conference and thing, it's filled with information that is frightening to the public that's designed to be put out there by these cosmic Manchurian candidates, I call them. And some of them are people who have been in the intelligence community, who've been in mind control programs where they're given drugs and also electronic holographic information, where they have all kinds of accounts of things going on out in space with humans and all kinds of horrible agendas. And it's all a program being run by their controllers. And this is not a science, it sounds like science fiction, I have to admit, but we need people to come forward who have an understanding that this is what's going on. So it's like the WHO when they said, you know, we won't be fooled again. We cannot be fooled again the way we were in Vietnam and the way we were in Iraq. This is the big one. This is the one that the guy who invented the rocket for Adolf Hitler, Werner von Braun, warned us about. We can't be fooled again on this one. if you had something that was any individual home or car, electric car, could be charged continuously, or even things that would run your computer or your household appliances continuously. At this point, anything that would prove the principle that is a closed loop running itself and puts out measurable wattage, which is power, and does real work in the real world in the classic definition of physics, then that's what we need. That's all we need, because it can be scaled up and scaled down. The key thing is to not keep it secret. Don't sit on it, because it's like these guys who sat on Stan Meyer's toroid. That was a free energy electromagnetic system that had a national security order on it. They worked on it, got it going, boom, they disappeared. And they did it secretively. They play on, here's the thing, the strength of these fascists in the covert world is that they have mastered the world of secrecy. So if you're trying to keep your intellectual property secret, if you go the patent route through any government in the world, if you do it in a way that is discreet or obscure, they gotcha. There's only one pathway out: massive open-sourced disclosure. And by open source means you're bypassing the intellectual property route. Now, some people say, well, I worked for 20 years on this, I want to be compensated. I'm telling you, we can compensate you now. But our goal is to get it out there so that the plans are on the internet, and we have so many, we're going to have 1 billion of these devices to run
Yes.
the, whatever, 2 billion households on the planet. You're going to need 2 billion of these devices. But we have to start somewhere. But we need something where we can prove this and get it out there so that it's no longer an urban myth. And I always say to people, free energy and perpetual motion is a misnomer, because there's a field of energy called the zero-point energy field that was proven decades ago in mainstream physics journals, and every cubic centimeter of space has enough potential energy within it to run the United States for a year. So the question becomes, you're not actually getting energy from nowhere. You're preserving the laws of thermodynamics and physics. It's just that there's another way that you're getting energy besides burning something or splitting the atom, causing all kinds of radioactive waste. So we have to figure out the facts are the American Federation of Scientists, and you can go to our website at SeriousDisclosure.com and see this document where they did a report and a press release on their national security project for this mainstream scientific group, the Federation of American Scientists, where they said, look, and Stephen Aftergood wrote this, and Mr. Aftergood said, there's 5,135 patents that have been confiscated under national security orders. And one example he gave was in the 1970s, a solar photovoltaic cell that would create electricity from the sun that was more than 20% efficient, which at the time was revolutionary. It'd be amazing now even. And they confiscated it. And so you can't claim that was some kind of a weapon. It was competing with coal and oil. And so they seized it. So this is such a corrupt system that anybody with a great breakthrough in energy needs to understand they can't play the game of the normal business, venture capital, patent, intellectual property game. Because if you play that game, they gotcha. But at the same time, I understand people wanting to be compensated for their efforts, and I think now luckily we have identified the people on my team who have the access to seriously large sums of funding for the environment and for energy efforts, that we can do that now. And we have a network that has exploded in the last year. Since Sirius came out 3 years ago, and it went to #1 on Netflix about 8 months ago, we have had such a huge network that's built up around what we're doing. And many of them are people that are, frankly, household names in America that want to see one of these technologies. This whole question of when disclosure serves secrecy, I am very skeptical, frankly, of a lot of efforts where they will combine the hard evidence we've put together. Because, on our website, Serious Disclosure, there's dozens of top-secret witnesses. There's all these top-secret documents. There's all this hard evidence. And then what they'll do, they'll take it and then attach to the credible evidence a lot of discrediting material or things that really scare the hell out of the public in sort of a pseudo or false disclosure. And this has been the biggest battle we've been fighting. And I think that the public needs to have a heads up and not be fooled again if all of a sudden the mainstream media starts covering the issue, but then attaching and spinning this sort of a threat from outer space onto it. Because I always laugh and I say, look, if you can't prove a negative, but if there were overtly hostile civilizations out there, they would have cleaned our clock by the time we had detonated the first atomic bomb in 1945. Certainly by the time we started going out into space with weapons and our space exploration programs, which were a proxy for the military and the Cold War competition with the Soviet Union. I mean, they would have absolutely just said, hit the pause button. But that hasn't happened. And I think that what they're waiting for us to do, from the contact experiences my team has had for 25 years all over the world, is that they're waiting for us to become a reasonably civilized society, which is at least not murdering ourselves and destroying, creating what I call planeticide, the killing of an entire planet deliberately and with malice aforethought, which is what's happening with the environment, which is a completely an unnecessary situation. I mean, there is absolutely no reason why we don't have zero-point quantum vacuum energy systems running everything, and so our environment would be pristine, 100% recycling of all materials. I mean, we could have a world that would be completely as pristine as it was, 2,000 years ago environmentally, and still have 7 billion people living on it if we stop living on it in a foolish way. And so I think that a civilization from any of these civilizations from other star systems are watching this, and a lot of people say, well, why don't they intervene and just fix it? I said, well, it doesn't work that way. I mean, it's like us going to Afghanistan trying to impose Jeffersonian democracy. We, the people of Earth, have to come together and make this happen. But you've got these people who are psychopaths, who are in the big money finance world and military-industrial complex, who really have an agenda that's nutty. And the agenda is this sort of an end-of-the-world apocalyptic view, because they don't understand anything. And they also want to be able to control the masses through fear. Because if you look at it, whether it's been through religious leaders or political leaders or what have you, it's demagoguery. It's fear that people respond to. And now what they're trying to do, and I've been watching this for 25 years, is to have someone else to demonize. I grew up in the South in the 50s and 60s and early 70s when there was still blatant racism and black and white water fountains, believe it or not. My girlfriend in high school was African American. I was almost murdered by some people who hated the fact that I had an African American girlfriend in North Carolina in 1972. So what I tell people is that humans are always trying to find someone to scapegoat and some new person to hate. So, it's got to be black people for one era, and then, there's misogyny, and then there's homophobia, so you have to hate all the gay people, and then you've got to hate this religious group or that religious group. And this is a real problem for humans. But ultimately, these guys, what they're wanting to do, these covert programs, they want to get people to unite around hating someone from outer space. So that would become the new source of, and it's sort of what I call it, interplanetary racism. And so what people need to understand, first of all, is educate themselves and get the materials and educate themselves. Number two, spread the word to other people. If someone is skeptical, that's fine. Show them the Disclosure Project book, the DVDs, the materials where it's very solid smoking gun. And what we are doing with this new film called Unacknowledged, and with the new book that'll come out with it, is to put the best of the best of the best of the best in this 2-hour movie and in this book, so that it would be something that anyone would look at and go, case closed. We have the evidence. This is it. And then on top of it, the technology that explains how an UFO or an ET craft would be being able to have the ability to go from point A to B in space because of the energy needs. You know, we can't figure out how to get to Mars without running out of rocket fuel. So I think that people have to understand that technology not only can explain how UFOs function, but it also will give us a new civilization on this planet so that we become acceptable to other civilizations in space that are waiting for us to behave in a civilized fashion. And part of being civilized is not only to quit massive wars and murders against each other, but also to stop destroying the biosphere. Because Gaia, I mean, the Earth is a conscious living being that is a organism, a biological organism that we are harming unbelievably. And, you know, I'm part Cherokee Indian. When I talk to Native American people, you know, there's this sense of painfulness of seeing what we're doing to the oceans and to the land and to the air. That's completely avoidable. I mean, this is 100% avoidable. If we didn't have any alternatives, I'd say, well, it's a consequence of the Malthusian problem of billions of people living with 1800s era fossil fuel energy systems. But we have had technologies that could give us a civilization that would be prosperous and just and abundant and clean for the better part of 100 years. I mean, this goes way beyond the modern UFO era, back to the early days of Tesla and even before Tesla. And unfortunately, the people who have so much power in the centralized banking financial system and petrodollar system and oil and what have you, they don't want to see this change happen. 100 years ago, they didn't want to see it, and they don't want to see it today. But we, the people, have to rise up and say, too bad, you've had 150 years of dirty industrial global domination. Now it's time to move on to a new civilization on Earth, and we're going to make it happen. There have been weapons in space since 1965, at least. I have a top-secret source who, in the mid-'60s, was involved in that. And, you know, the extraterrestrial civilizations are, look, many of them are hundreds of thousands to millions of years technologically more developed than we are. And, you know, clearly if they wanted to solve the problem here, they could do it. But again, it would be an external imposition, so they're not doing that. Now, what the question about contact with CE5, the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, is that any interstellar civilization, let's be clear what I'm talking about here, a civilization can go from one star system to another at multiples of the speed of light. By definition, they are also transdimensional. So there's no concern about going through a debris field because they can dematerialize in one point in space and reappear at another point in space, passing through other dimensions. And this is all done electronically, by the way. So you're not dealing with something that's simply accelerating through space, because you have to go beyond the speed of light to go from another star system to here. Because if you were anything less than the speed of light, it would take way too long to get here. So you're not speeding up and going through debris fields or anything else. At the same time, there is a global positioned weapon systems that when these ET craft appear, they are targeted and they are sometimes hit. And this is what Lynn Stringfield in the 90s called the crash retrieval syndrome, where there were so many cases where these reports of ET craft that were targeted and crashed using electromagnetic weapon systems. And this is true. We have more than one Disclosure Project witness who has been party to retrieval operations. Now, this means that when we're doing the diplomatic effort that we're leading, called the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind initiative, we have to understand transdimensional physics, transdimensional sciences, and how objects disappear at one point and reappear in another. I'll give you a great example. We were just in Arizona in a remote area on top of a mountain outside Tucson about a month ago. And when we were there, we had a number of events happen where objects would literally, they didn't fly in from space. They would just materialize right over us very briefly and then dematerialize. And then they would start doing all kinds of strange things through our electronic detectors, our magnetometers, our radar detectors, our laser detectors, our camera systems that would record. So there are all kinds of phenomena that attend a transdimensional civilization because they're able to drop out of linear space-time and go to another dimension and then reappear at another point in space-time. Also remember, they can be completely resonating beyond the speed of light where they're not visible to the naked eye or to any camera, and yet they're right there hovering right above you. And every once in a while, one of our digital cameras or an ultraviolet or infrared camera will capture them, and it's astonishing, these photos we have. But with the naked eye, you see nothing whatsoever. So a lot of the training I do to people is to bring people into the real space age, meaning the interstellar space age. And when you talk about interstellar, you're talking about beyond the speed of light. When you're talking beyond the speed of light, you're talking about a physics dealing with energy that is beyond the speed of matter and light. And therefore, you're talking about a whole new understanding of phenomenon that happen. But it means that they can appear, they could be out near the rings of Saturn and then have a craft appear hovering right in the field beside us, and it might be seen by everyone for 10 seconds, dematerialize, and all you'll see will be something that looks almost like a hologram or like a ghost-like object that is moving around and is communicating with everyone in our contact group. Many enlightened masters have been able to materialize, dematerialize objects, levitate, bilocate, all these. So these are well known. If you study the Vedas from the ancient Vedas from the Himalayas, you really get into this whole idea, what have been called siddhis, S-I-D-D-H-I-S. And I teach this at these week-long retreats that I teach, where people get a full course in the siddhis and the ancient Vedic knowledge of consciousness, but also of where mind and matter interface. And this is another part of what needs to be disclosed. When you're dealing with interstellar civilizations, they're not using cell phones and radio waves at the speed of light like we're using right now. They're using technologies that interface with coherent thought. So you think to the device and it is actuated, something it turns on or does something. And in fact, this is what Dr. John at Princeton and Adam Curry, who is in the film Sirius and who I just recently have met with, are developing. They're developing lamps, for example, where you can think a color and it'll turn that color, and using random number generators that interface with consciousness and thought. So even in the human overt sphere, never mind what covert programs have, this is being looked at very seriously and scientifically. And I think that, the work of Dean Radin and the Goswami and Dr. John at Princeton, there are a lot of people who are doing things in the laboratory that we're doing basically, let's call it clinically, out under the stars. But it's the same concept, that consciousness in the mind is an omnipresent field, and you can develop meditation techniques to remote view, to communicate, and to create very clear, coherent thought that can interface with an extraterrestrial interstellar communication system to make contact. And that's part of what we do. And of course, this blows people's minds because most people don't understand how their smartphone works. But this is actually very simple if you understand the fact that the conscious awareness whereby everyone is awake is actually a singularity. And actually, Erwin Schrödinger, the father of modern quantum mechanics and particle wave theory in 1908, Erwin Schrödinger said this. He said the total number of minds in the universe is one. It's a singularity. So this is the true singularity, and everyone has that within them. And so through meditative techniques, you can access that expanded state of mind, remote view, and then use thought to connect to interstellar communication systems and make contact. And in fact, that's what we do with the CE5 initiative. When I first started bringing this out in 1990, a lot of people thought this is kind of crazy. Can this work? And now we have thousands of teams all over the world doing it and having extraordinary experiences. But some of the experiences don't conform to like a Star Trek movie, because you have to begin to understand, how does an interstellar civilization interface, A, within a planet like ours that's become very armed, both in space and on the Earth with weapon systems tracking them, and B, how do they want us to understand a trans-dimensional interstellar reality? They're expecting us to get to a point in our own understanding where at least we're not Neanderthals, where we understand the nature of our true self and consciousness, but also the science of consciousness and the advanced electronic systems that exist that are interstellar, that allow for communication and also teleportation again across vast distances in space. And they're not traveling they're not communicating using a radio wave or a microwave or anything like that. Those are all traveling at the speed of light. It's much too slow. And look, even a nearby planet, at 1% of the distance through our own galaxy is 1,000 light years. If it took at the speed of light, it would take 1,000 light years to communicate home, and another 1,000 years to get a signal here. So you're talking about 2,000 years at the time since the birth of Christ, just to say hello, how are you, and the other end to say fine, thank you very much. So when you think about this and begin to understand it, you go, well, it makes complete sense that while some people would relegate all of this discussion to mysticism, it's not. It's the new science. Once we get past this disclosure period and get these technologies out that can save the Earth's environment and end all poverty on Earth and create a just world, the big sciences of the next 1,000 years are going to be in the science of consciousness and the interface between mind, matter, thought, all of that. Everything you were just talking about, levitation, materialization of objects. The human capability is unbelievable and has been demonstrated throughout human history. And right now, most people are just trying to scrape by a sort of a primitive existence. But that's a type of enforced macroeconomic slavery that's the result of the ignorance that has been enforced on the planet by these folks who do not want the public to become enlightened and have free energy and not be dependent on Big Brother or Big Oil or Big J.P. Morgan Chase Bank. I think you have to understand that when disclosure comes out in a way that is positive and truthful and brings out with it the sciences and technologies, all these big players who are, have amassed, and we're not talking billions, forget Bill Gates, we're talking hundreds of trillions of dollars in assets in these corporations and banking empires. Those are all going to become irrelevant because every single home and village will be self-sufficient. See, that's where we make a transition from a level 0 civilization, which is what we are now, to a level 1 civilization.
Welcome back. As always, we have an incredible show for you. Back by popular demand, one of the most requested speakers and lecturers and a true revolutionary and pioneer in ufology, the one and only Dr. Stephen Greer. Dr. Greer, it's a pleasure to have you back on.
Great to be with you.
It's amazing because every time I speak to you, we learn something new. Now, there's several things I want to talk to you about, but literally just a couple of minutes before we connected, someone literally wrote a question, and I was hoping we can direct that question to you from the listener. I'm going to read it word for word. This is from Renee in Tucson. Dr. Greer, have you given up on government as a source of official disclosure?
That's a great question, actually. And, there's a big backstory. We'd probably talk for the whole hour to get her informed as to what the background really is to that. And here's what I mean by it. I've been doing this for about 25 years. And between 1992 and 2001, when we launched the global disclosure movement at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., I had spent an unbelievable amount of time briefing the most senior people in the United States, Europe, all over the world, in government, members of Congress, and what have you. And what we were asking for in the early days, now you have to take this in perspective. I'm working full-time as a trauma doctor, emergency doctor. I have 4 little kids. I'm shuttling back and forth from North Carolina up to Washington, doing briefings for the CIA director, for the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, members of the Senate Intelligence Committee, etc. So in the early days, what I was wanting to do, and this is also how Lawrence Rockefeller got involved when he realized what we were up to, was to put together the best available evidence we could, and for me to find firsthand government witnesses, astronauts, cosmonauts, CIA people, KGB people, and put them together and get their information and get their documents and get the evidence for the fact that we're not alone in the cosmos, we're being visited, and that there are very secret projects mishandling it. And that the hope was, during the transition from Papa Bush, George W.'s dad, who had been head of the CIA back in the 70s, and Bill Clinton, who became president in 1993, January of 93, during that period, there was some thought that there might be an opening, and particularly because the Cold War had just ended, that they could put a fig leaf on the secrecy about UFOs, blaming it on the exigencies of the Cold War, even though that was never the reason, and come out and come clean and end the cover-up and all of that. Well, actually, President Clinton was very open to that concept, and certainly his CIA director, R. James Woolsey, was, as were many other people. But the problem became with someone actually wanting to take the steps to do it. So I spent personally an enormous amount of time putting together this initiative. As you know from the Associated Press, AP sued the Clinton Library and got the original Project Starlight documents, which was the name of this operation prior to the Disclosure Project, which I founded in the year 2000. The Project Starlight documents, there was one that was a letter signed by me and astronaut Edgar Mitchell and cosmonaut Marina Popovich and all kinds of people, basically recommending that the president take this seriously and change it. Of course, and Lawrence Rockefeller was very supportive of this. Now, I think his brother David Rockefeller of Chase Manhattan Bank was less amused, but Lawrence was the philosopher of the family and very, very favorable to this. But he was getting a lot of flack from his nephew, who was Jay Rockefeller, who was the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and other people in sort of the mainline world of secrecy. So Lawrence, however, really was a white hat in this, or wanted to be, but he didn't want to push too far. So we took the lead. Basically, I took the lead in providing the briefings and putting together the evidence and the people. And we thought, if we put the best evidence together and provide compelling reasons why the president and his national security team, as well as key people in the Congress, should get behind ending the secrecy and bringing this information out and the technology and with all of that, that perhaps they would do it. Well, the problem is, having been basically doing this for multiple presidencies, what I have concluded is that the political class are in two big problems. The biggest one is that they actually don't have access control over these projects. Now, what do I mean by that? Just because you've been briefed on them doesn't mean you control them. Don't conflate those two things. Those are very different things. And what I discovered, to my absolute shock and horror, was that the President of the United States, as well as his CIA director, as well as the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency and the members of the Senate Intelligence Committee I personally met with, like Senator Dick Bryan from Nevada, where Area 51 is, none of them knew anything. And when they asked, they were basically lied to. In fact, Senator Claiborne Pell, who was the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, which when I met with him, ironically, I said, you know, Senator, you have been deprived of dealing with the ultimate foreign relations issue. And I pointed to the stars above our head. We were out on a patio in California. And he looked at me and he said, you know, Doctor, I believe you're right. I said, yeah, I am. So, but he also told me that he had made inquiries through official channels and never gotten any answers. But none of these people felt that it was bogus or that there wasn't something going on. But that it was just an ultra-black project, what we later came to know as an unacknowledged special access project that is not acknowledged to anyone who's not in that compartmented operation. So the problem became, okay, they're interested, they're kind of supportive, but as the CIA director said to me, how do we disclose that which we don't have access to? You get it? So the problem would become, if it was done that way, it would create the largest, most severe constitutional crisis since 1776, and I am not overstating that. So the politicians really don't want to touch that third rail and get electrocuted. Now you have to add on another part of this, and that is that the media, the big mainstream media, not you guys, are completely corrupted by interest in the corporate intelligence sector to ridicule this subject or to whitewash it or to, you know, they'll get someone from a trailer park with all their teeth missing to, you know, say they saw something, but they won't let someone who's a general or a cosmonaut on the air or an astronaut. So what you find is that the big media are poised to attack like a pack of hyenas, crunching on the bones of any politician or public figure that would dare even mention the word UFO or extraterrestrial intelligence and make them a laughingstock. So then you have to add that whole problem into this. The bottom line is, it's not that I have given up that these officials in government should do it. I am extremely skeptical that they will. And that's why, after we notified every significant agency in the U.S. government that we were going to come forward with people who had top secret clearances who had been part of these projects and had firsthand information, that those folks would do so legally without any penalty because the projects that were being disclosed were themselves illegal operations and the National Security Act didn't apply and they couldn't prosecute them. And to this date, none of them have been threatened or prosecuted. Very different, say, from Edward Snowden, who disclosed projects which, even though they were horrible, those projects were being briefed to the president and to the key members of the House oversight committees and the Senate oversight committees. So what you have with the UFO issue is something that Eisenhower warned about that's gone completely off the rails, that is a completely illegal operation, and which the president does not control, nor does anyone in the Congress. This means that you basically have this fourth branch of government. You know, you have your executive branch with the president, you have your legislative branch with Congress, and you have your judicial branch headed by the Supreme Court. Well, there's this fourth element, let's call it. This fourth element pretty much does what it damn well wants, and if you get in their way, you're lucky if they don't just flat out kill you. So after I had put all this stuff together, a good friend of the president, of Clinton's, came to my house and said, look, they're very supportive of what you're recommending, but they're concerned that if the president pushes on this issue too much, he'll end up like Jack Kennedy. And I started laughing. I mean, I literally laughed out loud at the table with my children. And this man said, no, we're not kidding. And I couldn't believe he wasn't joking. And I said, well, Kevin, we need to talk about this some other time, not around the children. And so what I learned is that the fear is really palpable, because even if they had the courage to do it, you know, there are these other things that would be set loose if they started moving in that direction. So there are an enormous number of problems with, let's call it, the authority figures that the people look to, and I think they shouldn't be looking to them for disclosure. What I have said since 2001 is that we, the people, are going to do disclosure. We're going to ask that there be support from the government and Congress, and that's fine. But the likelihood they're going to do anything is the likelihood of a snowball surviving in hell for more than a nanosecond, because they're simply not in a position to get access and control the projects they would like to disclose. And that scares the hell out of them, frankly. The fear is palpable. So this begins to raise the question, how is this going to happen? I said, well, it's going to happen by exactly what we're doing. We, the people, need to network to other people who've been at Lockheed Skunk Works that make all the super-secret UFO-type anti-gravity devices with their underground base called the Cube near Edwards Air Force Base. There, I named it for you. And the folks who are the contractors out at the Dugway Proving Grounds near Provo, and the people who are underground in the facilities near the Nellis Range, and Alice Springs in Australia, and people who have worked in some of these compartments in the Pentagon and the CIA. I mean, there are people there, and get them to come out in a second wave of mass disclosure by the people doing it. Now, would at some point there be, if enough people did that, would there be an impetus to where even the New York Times and the Washington Post and the other outlets that always ridicule this subject would have to take it seriously? Perhaps. And at that point, you might get official endorsement of this from people like the President and senior members of the Senate and House and what have you. But I think that for them to do it without there being that kind of massive groundswell of public pressure and, frankly, disclosure of further and further detailed information that's corroborated, not, one person telling a great story, but multiple people come forward and corroborate it, preferably with evidence, documents, photos, the material if they can. And that's actually what we've been calling for. Now, a lot of people are scared to death to do that. I mean, I know the first meeting we had in California at Asilomar near Monterey in 1995 of these disclosure witnesses, the fear was palpable. In 97, when we were getting ready to do briefings for Congress, there was more fear palpable. There were more witnesses. There were more of these military people coming forward. And what we found, however, is that if you get them, a bunch of them together like we did, and this is what we pioneered, then they feel safer, because they're not doing it as lone wolves. They're doing it as people working with other people who understand that they're doing it patriotically, because the operations keeping this information secret are themselves unconstitutional, illegal, and are destroying everything that America stands for. And so that is what has to be explained to people in those projects and organize them to come forward. So that is what we have done, and that's what we've been working on. Now, of course, that needs to happen, and I think what I've called for in my 2015 New Year's message is for this to happen and to get quickened. And so anyone who is one of these military or contractor government witnesses should contact us. There's a place at our website, SeriousDisclosure.com, for witnesses to write in. Now, we're not interested in secondhand, third-hand. We're not interested in people who can't have some corroboration of what they would be saying, at least a DD-214 or something to show they were in the military or employed by some contractor at the time that they saw what they saw. So, we have to vet them. But that's what we did with our initial 110. If you go to our website, by the way, SeriousDisclosure.com, we've got more than 6 of these witnesses up on our website. Anyone can see for free. Just go there and look at it. But we need to have more of that. Now, if enough of that happened, John, then you might see something. But I do not think that the people need to understand how this has happened and the backstory of disclosure, because this is not known by the public very well. And I'm actually going to do a whole afternoon seminar in Washington, probably in March, and people can sign up to come to it if they want, Our website has a free newsletter. We have no advertising on the site, and you can get this for free. Just put your email address in, Sirius, SIRIUS disclosure.com. And what I'm planning to do is go through an entire background of how Disclosure Project got launched and what really happened behind the scenes, because it's an amazing story. Now, you can just get from the few highlights I've shared. And I think that people need to understand that, because they need to understand that it's not as if we didn't get hundreds of thousands of people to fax and write to their members of Congress in 2001, well, before 9/11 happened, and that we didn't have direct information going to the president and the CIA director and these key people. And by the way, this project, the Disclosure Project, is the only project that's ever actually done direct meetings with people at that level of government. And in fact, last year I met with 120 world leaders on an island off the coast of Australia discussing these issues. But getting people to stick their necks out when they kind of realize that, oh my God, I'm going to be exposed as the emperor that has no clothes. I mean, I don't care if you're the Minister of Defense of Australia or the President of the United States. And this is what Eisenhower was warning us about when he said the secrecy of the military-industrial complex was becoming so complicated back in 1961 when he left office. And that President Eisenhower said this is becoming a threat to our way of life and our democracy. And he was right. He was 100% right.
Something you mentioned a little while ago literally is a good transition to what we're going to go into next. And literally, you took it out of my brain. The fact that the government, we shouldn't be holding our breath for POTUS to make an announcement that we've been visited, but rather we have to take it into our own hands. The reason why I mentioned you as a pioneer when I introduced you is because you were talking about consciousness well before any of the other researchers were. And I'd like to say that I'm very proud to see that a lot of people have finally picked up on the realization and the importance of consciousness, such as, Dr. Edgar Mitchell, Sixth Man on the Moon, Paula Harris, even Grant Cameron and Colin Andrews now focus on consciousness. And right. you can't separate science and consciousness/spirituality, because that is the missing link. And this is what the segue that I was going to take it to. You produce events where you're teaching people the protocols for CE5, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, human-initiated contact. And you are creating ambassadors around the world to hold these global events so we can take it upon ourselves. And I would love for you to discuss about the progress on the CE5, because clearly a lot more people than last year and the year before. It's just exponential, the growth of the amount of people. And so I would love the listeners to know how they can get involved with CE5 and what the next event is going to be. And I know of one that we're going to speak about coming here in California, Southern California, in April.
Right. Well, this is really exactly what I was going to talk about next, and that is the other part of disclosure is mass contact. Now, everyone says, why don't the ETs just land on the White House lawn? That's what Larry King asked me. And I laughed, no, it doesn't happen that way. They're gauging to what extent humans on this planet are ready for peaceful contact. They're not going to push beyond the point of readiness and the level of consciousness of the people on this planet, because if they were to do that, it would be an act of, if you will, psychological violence. It would be too traumatic. So what we have to do is to educate ourselves about these civilizations, what it is to be an interstellar civilization, and what does that mean? Well, in 1990, I founded the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, CSETI, for the purpose of training people to do basically to learn to do what I experimented with as a teenager, and that is going into deep consciousness and the samadhi state, being able to remote view these extraterrestrial civilizations, connect to their communication devices and their own consciousness, because their communication systems, instead of hooking to cell phone towers, are linked to thought. So if they want to turn something on, they think to it. So it's at the speed of thought, not the speed of light. Why? Because if you're going from one star system to the other and communicating from one star system to another, if you're 1,000,000 light years away, it takes 1,000,000 years for the signal to get there. So you know that it's got to be beyond the dimension of space and time. okay, the 3 and 4D sector. You're going to have to go into 5D and 6D and 12D and 50D, meaning these states of consciousness and higher states of consciousness. And anyone who actually knows and looks at the astrophysics, frankly, scientifically, of what it would take to become an interstellar civilization, and those are the ones we're talking about being here, know that you would have to have mastered not only going beyond linear space and time transdimensionally, but also communicating that way. Well, guess what? We may not have devices that advanced. I mean, most people are happy to have an iPhone or smartphone, but which is really a piece of junk, frankly. But they know that we have our minds. They know that we're sentient and conscious, and so we can become aware of awareness itself. We can be mindfulness of just the mind, and in that state go very deep, and then open up to where they are and to other dimensions and other points in space. 1,000 light years from here, 1,000,000 light years from here, 1,000,000,000 light years from here. And the only limit to us doing that is our willingness to develop that capability, which is everyone's God-given gift. Everyone can do this, by the way. I do not believe in this whole thing of gurus and certain people can do it and other people can't. Baloney. Everyone can do it. They just need to learn it. But what we put together, we have 2 apps. One of them is a free app that you can get. We just launched it this year, or in the past 12 months. And you can go to our website, SiriusDisclosure.com, SIRIUS, like the star system, disclosure.com, and get this app, download it for free, and you can see who is in your area doing this and interested in this. It's a great way of networking. The other app has a really small fee associated with it because we had to pay a developer to do it. But it's huge amount of material. It teaches you how to remote view, how to meditate, how to make contact, what protocols to use, how to form your own team, and it's also available. You can go to the website and click on a link, and you'll have it on your smartphone. So what's really amazing in the last year, there are literally thousands of people all over the world who have formed these teams on every continent, and almost every country. It's really beautiful to see. And so that's another way of ending this sort of secrecy, because if more and more people do this, the ETs that are watching the development on Earth of our civilization will say, at a certain point, now what that point is, I can't tell you, but at a certain point, there'll be a critical mass of people doing this where they'll say, they're ready, and we'll do it, and we'll really come forward more and more boldly. They're waiting for us. See, I always tell people, we're responsible for the secrecy. Why are people looking at television and idiotic, cats playing the piano on YouTube instead of getting together and going out under the stars together? So, or why aren't they networking with people in their own community and finding out what are the top secret people that they could get to come forward as Disclosure Project witnesses? So my message is that of empowerment, not only for direct contact by we the people to the ETs, let's bypass the government, but also disclosure, let's bypass the government. Now, as a consequence of that, at some point in the future, when that'll be, I don't know, the government of this country and others will absolutely have to deal with the issue, because it will reach a critical mass of data and experiences and sightings and what have you, that it'll reach a breakout where the intelligence community and even the mainstream media that is basically pimping, and they're basically they're an asset of the intelligence community on key things. Anyone who thinks we have a free press when it comes to really sensitive stuff is incredibly naive. I mean, I've seen it firsthand too many times. But at a certain point, then that will break around that. And there's another thing. We can reach more people on the internet than MSNBC or CBS 60 Minutes reaches in a broadcast. So at a certain point, these media outlets and these authority figures that everyone is sort of, everyone's bowing at the altar of officialdom, whether it be academics or whether it be the government or whether it be the big mainstream media. My attitude about that is, well, they're kind of making themselves irrelevant, because we, the people, can organize, and we can do contact, and we can do disclosure, and we can bring out these technologies also. That's the third part of the project I run. There's three things. It's like our little symbol is three equilateral circles that makes a triangle, an equilateral triangle. And one of them is contact, the CSETI project and CE5. One is disclosure, and the other one is bringing out the technologies to create a new civilization that can endure for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. So that's really what our projects are focused on. And now, everyone wants an either-or perspective on this. I'm not saying that we shouldn't ask our governmental officials to do something about this, but I just think we have to have realistic expectations, and we have to know what the milieu, what is the environment in which these leaders are functioning. Highly politicized, they'd be crucified as Senator Moonbeam if they were to come forward. Congressman Dennis Kucinich from Ohio, who ran for president in '08, he personally had a sighting. Unfortunately, got outed by Shirley MacLaine. I knew all about it from beforehand. And, I had been meeting with him since 2001. He became chairman of the subcommittee for government reform and oversight for domestic events and domestic governmental affairs. But when I asked him to hold a hearing, he still wouldn't do it, even though he knew these were real. He knew, because it would be the end of his career, and he knew it. And this was a very enlightened, friendly congressman. Same thing, I've met with Republicans who have had very close members. Congressman Dan Burton, who had been, back in the day, chairman of the Government Reform and Oversight Committee of the House, a Republican, very conservative from Indiana. He came to the private briefings we held in 1997. He had a very close friend in his office, a woman who he had been friends with and worked with him on his staff for many years, who had a very close encounter. And he knew this was real, but he still wouldn't do it because of the fear of the ridicule attached to it. And even if they overcome the fear of the ridicule, then they're going to get a visit from somebody in a suit, and they're probably going to get threatened. Now, that sounds like something out of a spy novel, but let me tell you, it happens. It's happened to me. It's happened to many people I know in circles who've been pushing on this issue. So at a certain point, then the big question becomes, who has the courage to take on this fascistic fourth element of this global government that no one has elected or appointed, that's run amok of the law and the Constitution? It's going to have to come from the people, just like we, the people, overthrew the tyranny of King George in 1776. So I tell people, you're not going to do it sitting on your hands, and you're not going to do it thinking someone else is going to do it for you. And this is where I tell people to be very careful with this idea that, we can say, hey, let's get together and ask the president or ask our representative to do something, and that's all we have to do. No, there's a heck of a lot more work and heavy lifting we, the people, have to do. But you know what? Think about history. If you go back as many thousand years as we've had recorded history, there has never, ever been a major change in society that's come from the centers of power. It's always come from people in left field or controversial movements that have been on, quote, the fringe. Well, that's us. Okay, we need to own it. It's fine. And that's actually how change really happens. It doesn't happen from people who are in power because they are so beholden to these powerful interests. And usually they're comfortable. They're usually pretty wealthy, and they don't want to rock the boat. So there has to be people who are willing to rock the boat, and that would be you and me and everyone listening on this radio show.
And this is exactly why we do this. You made several important points. I just want to let you know we got a little over 20 minutes left, and we have several important topics. First of all, about Kucinich, you're absolutely right. The poor guy, when he was on a debate and he mentioned about his sighting, he was just taken down. And the people that are visited to when they talk about this publicly, you're right. They're scared to speak after these visits, and some clearly disappear. And with regards to the speed of thought, that's actually a question Ms. Harris, who's going to be joining us tomorrow night, Paula Harris, told me to ask you about, to the speed of thought travel, which is something you mentioned. Now,
you know what? It's even the wrong paradigm. There is no speed because thought emanating from consciousness, particularly when you're in a deep level of consciousness, is instantaneous anywhere in the cosmos. So it is instant. Absolutely instant. So there is no time factor when you transcend time and space. This is the whole point of the non-local, and this is a physics term, the non-locality of mind and consciousness and thought allows for instantaneous communication, instantaneous real-time viewing anywhere in the cosmos. And in fact, even looking backward or forward, but that's another discussion. And that's what I train people. You know, we're going to do in April in Joshua Tree, right near Joshua Tree National Park. We found this amazing estate that is on 600 private acres that we're going to be gathering with in April there. And what I'm planning to do is take people through that whole process of how to go into that state of awareness and then how to use consciousness and thought as well as our laser systems and other technologies we have to make contact, and then how does that contact come back to you? And so that whole event, by the way, starts on the 10th of April and goes for a week until the 17th. And it's just going to be amazing. Information about it's at our website. I think we just announced it last week, and there are only 3 positions left, to be honest with you. But we're also going to be doing that in Colorado, and this is the first time we're going to do it there. In Colorado in June, on June 14th for a week, we're going to be in this place near Mesa Verde National Park where the Anasazi Native Americans vanished, and it's near Durango, and we have found a retreat center where we're going to be for a week. So people who want to come to that in June, that's on 14th to the 21st of June, and that's going to be really fantastic in Colorado because we've had, and that's where Paula Harris, I talked a couple years ago, I brought her out to southern Colorado, and we were there doing this while we were filming the movie Sirius, which people can still see at our website if they want to go and see it online. And she was with me, and we were doing this whole protocol with a circle of about 25, 30 people, and this disc, this ET craft floated over, came right over us, and turned, made a right-hand turn, and then a fighter jet was vectored in and chased it, and it kind of made a spiral and vanished. We have this on videotape, and she went, "Oh my God, this is amazing!" So Paula Paula Harris loved it because that was her first time out under the stars doing that with us, and that's where so many people have to. It's wonderful to do it for a whole week because what we do every single night, no matter what the weather, by the way, we go out under the sky and we do this, and it's a wonderful experience for people because it's a deep immersion week for folks. But for folks who can't make it to one of these expeditions, they can do it by getting the app and learning it. And we also have a whole training kit on our website you can order. And people have done that. We had someone from, I think it was Romania, write in not long ago that had done this with the app, and he was a truck driver. And here he had this amazing contact event with this craft that came right over, and then this conscious contact with the beings on board the craft, and all kinds of trans-dimensional amazing experiences. And his was just sort of the salt-of-the-earth truck driver in Eastern Europe. So what we're finding is that everyone can do this if they want to take the time. I tell people there's nothing to be afraid of, except other humans. I mean, we've been shot at in Mexico by people, and we've had all kinds of problems with humans. But, I mean, the ETs, we've just had the most amazing, beautiful experiences. And it's nice to do it with a group. You don't have to have 25 people, but if you have 3 or 4 or 5 people or 8 people, it's great. And there are teams now of the CE5, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, now all over the world. And if you want to see where there are people interested in this near you, you can get this free app and just, look and see. And then everywhere there's a little triangle, that's where there's a person or a team.
This is exactly why I call you revolutionary, because you are empowering the people to take it into their hands. Now, I know because we're compressed on time, we can literally spend hours on each individual topic, and then we'd probably still run out of time. But briefly,
Right.
Before I come back to CE5 and the April event and the astonishment from everybody that attends these events, I want to go to some major point. And I've been wondering for years, why are they hiding the extraterrestrials from us? Well, do they think we can't handle it? And it was at the Sirius premiere in Los Angeles. I think it was your scientist, correct me if I'm mistaken, Adam Curry. Is that his name?
Gary
Regardless.
Nolan. Gary
Yes,
Nolan.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. We were speaking afterwards, and I realized it's not about us not being able to handle it. It's all about the technology. The governments want to keep us in check. They don't want us to have the ability to have free energy or anything that they can't charge us with. And that's what you really brought to the table in my mind to wake up the world, on top of all the amazing things you've done with the Disclosure Project and, of course, CE5. And I was wondering if for a few moments we can talk about the technologies.
Well, this is really where the rubber meets the road. If you go all the way back to the Wilbur Smith top secret document from Canada from 1951 or 50, it's right in that early 1950s period, it talks about the fact that there was a top secret team headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush, who headed up the atomic bomb Manhattan Project in World War II, and some other people who were working on the modus operandi, the technology, propulsion, and energy systems behind the UFOs. This is an undisputed, official, top-secret document that accidentally got declassified some years ago. We have it, and it's up on our website. Go look at it. So I tell people who are skeptics, I said, it's all there. I mean, I don't say anything that we can't establish. So you have to think, in this document, it literally says that the secrecy surrounding that project that was studying how the UFOs operate was more top secret and sensitive than the development of the hydrogen bomb. Not the A-bomb, the hydrogen bomb. Remember, a hydrogen bomb's like 100 atomic bombs. It's the ultimate doomsday weapon. And we hadn't even detonated the first hydrogen bomb until 1952. So this document was before then. And so the reason for it is because if this technology were to come out, it would be the end of all oil, gas, coal, centralized utilities, power lines, car engines, train engines, boat engines, anything that uses something that you burn, or nuclear power plants that split the atom to create heat to boil water. It's just basically a big steam engine. It's all a nuclear power plant is. All of it would be obsolete. And by the way, so would solar and wind. So you're talking hundreds of trillions of dollars in commodities and assets that we've rendered obsolete. So now we're talking about a revolution in the macroeconomic. This is what Paul Hellyer, the Minister of Defense of Canada, and I, when I first did my first press conference with him in Toronto years ago, before almost anyone knew about him, he and I had a private conversation at his home, and he said, yes, he was trained really as a macroeconomic theorist, and he said, it must be, and he had never thought of this either. And I said, well, with all due respect, the Honorable Paul Hellyer, as Minister of Defense, was left out of the picture on this, just like others have been. But I said, this is the reason you were lied to. Because if this were to be known, why would anyone need oil or coal or any of this stuff? Now, the problem goes back before even, say, Roswell. It goes back to the early 1900s, and late 1800s, when Faraday and Maxwell, and then people like Tesla were experimenting with very high voltage systems that at certain frequencies and resonances will create a vector into what's called this zero-point energy field. And guess what? You get more energy out than you have to put in as a human. There's still conservation of the law of physics because there's an energy field that's virtually infinite called the zero-point field and in the quantum vacuum. So now, what's interesting is that back then they didn't really have experimental data to explain zero-point energy, but Professor Casimir decades ago proved it. This is, again, was in mainstream physics journals. So why are we still burning oil from Exxon and Saudi Arabia? Very good question. Well, that is the $600 trillion question, John. And if you were to disclose that the UFOs were real, the very first thing anyone's going to ask is, well, how the hell are they moving? They're silent. They can go hundreds of thousands of miles per hour and make a right-hand turn. They're anti-gravity. They're obviously not burning any fuel. How are they going? Well, you would have to, that whole Pandora's box from the point of view of people who control the macroeconomic system that has ensured that, you know, out of 7 billion people on Earth, there are only a handful doing very well, and half the planet doesn't even have indoor plumbing. Why? Because, in a sense, we're all slaves living on someone else's plantation. Now, granted, the American plantation is in better condition than the one in the Congo, but make no mistake about it, it's a master's slave mindset. And we think we abolished slavery in the 1860s. We did not. It's this economic industrial slavery, and it is awful. And you know, I always say that there's sort of this joke that we have a free market. Well, how can you have a free market if you are suppressing the biggest scientific developments of the last 100 years? This is ridiculous. But in then steps this World War II era period where we started having Foo Fighters. Yes, there's a band named Foo Fighters, but the real original Foo Fighters were these UFOs in Europe that we were encountering, and so were the Nazis. And we studied them, and we found out and concluded that they were, in fact, interplanetary vehicles. How do I know this? Because General Jimmy Doolittle was sent there by Franklin Roosevelt, and Jimmy Doolittle, that general's nephew, was a physician, a very dear friend of mine, Dr. John Altshuler from Denver. And he said that's exactly what happened. So we have known that we're being visited by interstellar vehicles since at least that point, but when we finally got our hands on one in the 40s and started studying it, then that, combined with some of the work that was done by the Nazis, by Hermann Oberth and Werner von Braun and others, to study, and that is not a myth, that is true. The Nazis had a secret weapon dealing with anti-gravity, and we had a secret weapon dealing with atomic power. But all those people were brought in and made the foundation of our space program, and then the newly hatched CIA. And that's just a historical fact. Now, in those 70 years since then, what we have done, basically, since 1945 to now, is that this massive labyrinthine and Byzantine secrecy empire has become so complicated that almost no one has been able to penetrate it.
Dr. Greer, we got about 10 minutes left, and I know we got several things to touch on, and I was just going to make a quick comment. The Honorable Paul Hellyer will not only be joining us again here soon, but he speaks very highly of you as well, just as everybody does, and he too is picked up on the consciousness, and if only he was involved and knew about this when he was in power, I think would be in a greater place. Now, I want to go back to the Galactic Federation, because truly we are a primitive species when we're fighting, having these terrorist attacks, warfare, and as you know, the government wants to keep us in check, both because of the technologies and they use fear as a tool. And we are being invited to join this peaceful federation of these extraterrestrials. But in order for us to do that, we have to achieve peace. And that is something that you've been teaching people. And this event, like you said, you have a small group of people, and each one of these people leaves literally transformed. And that's why it's so important, because each time one of these people attends these events, they leave and they end up starting their own. And that's how you're building this global infrastructure, which I think is truly amazing. I know we only have a few minutes left. Like I said, it's under 10, more closer to 8 minutes. But if we can briefly talk about false flags and then come back full circle to CE5, why it's so important that people learn it, whether it be through the app, the protocols, or attending these small groups, which I think are the best possible way, and how that's going to take us to the next level.
Yeah, and I hope to have a larger group event in April also, if we can get that organized in time too, so if, anyone can come in a much larger setting. But here's the thing about false flag operations. And false flag operations are things where intelligence operatives will hoax something to create a decoy and to create a nexus of disinformation, a sort of a push of false information and events. And this is exactly where Werner von Braun on his deathbed, his biggest concern was that at some point they would pull the trigger on something that was hatched in the late 50s and 60s, and that is to stage a false quote, alien attack, like the movie Independence Day and all the other science fiction rubbish. But what's interesting about it is that, when I first heard that, I had already been briefed by several other people who had actually been on an interagency committee planning to do that. Now, let me repeat that, where it was full. And I said, when were you on this committee when it was fully operational, where they could stage things that would look like UFOs, creatures that would look like aliens, and they said, oh, well, that was in 1974, and it had been going for quite a while before then. Now, this was a guy, and then I ended up meeting several different people who didn't know each other, who had been involved in various components of this false flag operation. And so, I started thinking, well, what is this about? And one of them said, look, you cannot keep growing the multi-trillion-dollar military-industrial complex without a bigger and bigger and bigger enemy. And the Soviet Union had collapsed. Okay, then we had this global terrorism threat, so we could, invade whatever countries in the Middle East and spend a few trillion. But ultimately, Leon Panetta, the CIA director that I had gotten a lot of briefing materials to in the early Obama administration period, he once said, he says, we're spending over $100 billion a year chasing less than 70 Al-Qaeda people in Afghanistan. This is insane. So the bottom line is, how do you grow that machine, this military-industrial machine? Well, you've got to have a bigger threat. Well, so the ultimate one would be an interplanetary threat. And that's what they've been preparing the masses for through documentaries, through movies, through false information, through the UFO subculture, frankly. And I think that the reason for it is that they know that you have to prepare psychologically people to hate something enough to be able to then pay in blood and treasure for the next war. So this is, as insane as this sounds, this is the thinking behind folks, some of the people in these covert programs. And I was warned back in the early to mid-'90s, it was probably 93, 94, 95, that if I started exposing that would be the thing that they really would be upset about. It is because they don't care if people believe UFOs are real and that ETs are real, so long as they believe that there are enough of them out there that are a problem to support the next big war push. So it's sort of like the Gulf of Tonkin incident in the Vietnam War, where we kind of exaggerated and staged this whole thing so Johnson would panic and the Congress would panic and authorize a massive expansion of the Vietnam War when we were getting ready to get the hell out of there, which is what we should have done. So these things happen throughout history all the time. This is not a conspiracy theory. So I always tell people, let the buyer beware, caveat emptor. You've got to be aware that there is this tendency to put out frightening information. And I tell people, it's way too late for world peace. We have to have universal peace, because we've squandered 100 years where we should have had world peace, and now we're in this situation where we're poised to become interplanetary. So we have got to get our consciousness to a point where we cannot be manipulated. It's like the old song from the 70s, we won't be fooled again. We cannot be fooled again. And unfortunately, now this is my own take on this, the majority of people who get involved in the UFO subculture do get fooled again, because there's so much information out there that is frightening, when I think the really thing we need to be frightened of is the degree to which we are manipulated with fear. No one's talking about that. And I think this is the thing that keeps me up most at night, is the extent to which people can be stampeded into something like we were in Vietnam, or for that matter, Iraq. When obviously there were no weapons of mass destruction there, and we knew it. But we still, everyone got stampeded into it because of what happened on 9/11. So now the question is, could there be a cosmic 9/11? There could be. And I have met with men who have been on these interagency teams where those things have been planned and ready. They could push a button and launch it tomorrow, and it would fool virtually everyone from the White House on down. So I think the public needs to be not fooled again. And so, I always tell people, you got to put a light there where this sort of dark and, sort of crazy ideas keep festering and kind of pull it's sort of like the Wizard of Oz, where you have the old guy back there, scaring the bejeebies out of one, and then they finally pull the curtain back and it's this old curmudgeon. Well, that's a lot of this. The whole fear that people have about aliens. Believe me, if you've got the ability to travel from one star system to another and they were hostile enough to hate us, it'd be over. It wouldn't be like one ufologist, they've been warring over Earth for 290 million years. Really? With what? Clubs and machine guns? I said, come on. We're talking about civilizations that are capable of interstellar transdimensional travel. The technology associated with that level of sophistication, you could terminate all life on Earth in a nanosecond. It would be point, set, match, and frankly would have been when we detonated the first atomic bomb if these ETs were truly hostile. Now, this does not mean that all these civilizations are particularly like what we're doing, but I don't like what humans are doing 90% of the time. Come to my emergency department on a Saturday night and see all the stabbings and gunshots and strangulations and horrors and rapes. Humans have a lot of growing up to do. So it doesn't mean, however, that they are overtly hostile to the human race and Earth, but they're very concerned. Here's what I think people need to flip the question around. What are they concerned about here? I think they're concerned about humans developing these technologies and becoming an existential threat to other star systems. That's what I think the concern is.
I would have to agree. We're down to the last little over a minute or so. I can't stress the importance for everyone out there listening of taking CE5 lessons and literally taking disclosure into your own hands. Dr. Greer, like I said, you are a true revolutionary and a pioneer, which is why so many people are following you, and you're leading by example. And I was hoping you could spend about a minute and a half or a minute or so giving people one final message, and of course, one more time, where to find you.
Yes, if people really want to drill down on all this information, there's just thousands of pages of it at SiriusDisclosure.com, SIRIUS Disclosure.com. And if you want to find out, what are the projects we're going to be doing in your area or what have you, just sign up on, there's a free newsletter and email list. You can put your email address in. We do not sell it or share it. And, you'll then be in the loop. If you want to become part of the CE5 contact teams, there's a free app where you can network with everyone in the world that you can get on the website. And then there's an app that's a training program that you can do that puts all this on your smartphone, actually turns your smartphone into a magnetic field detector so that when the ET craft are approaching or even in another dimension and nearby, it'll start going off and altering the magnetic field. It's amazing technology, and it's very, very inexpensive. And then if you can come, to these events in Joshua Tree in April or the one-week training programs or the one that we're doing in Colorado in June, that's a really great experience for people who can get time off work and make it out there and join us. It's a small group. It's only 25 people, and it's an amazing experience for folks.
I strongly recommend everybody out there listening, go to SiriusDisclosure.com. Dr. Greer, it is always a pleasure.